Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a scenario that honestly sounds like it was ripped straight out of a Hollywood thriller, but it is entirely based on cold, hard medical reality. I mean, just picture it. You're on a luxury cruise in the middle of the ocean, thousands of miles from home, and there is this invisible killer silently stalking the corridors. It's wild. We're going to explore the incredible real-life epidemiology behind this ghost ship medical mystery. Okay, let's dive into this. It's April 1st, and a beautiful cruise ship carrying around 150 passengers and crew from 23 different countries sets sail from Ushuaia, Argentina. The itinerary? A breathtaking voyage to Antarctica and the remote islands of the South Atlantic. For the first few days, everything was absolutely picture perfect. People were socializing, partying, soaking in those once-in-a-lifetime views. But right there, underneath the surface of this luxury trip, a microscopic threat had already boarded the vessel with them. Within days, perfectly healthy passengers began falling gravely ill, and soon they started dying one by one. The ship was utterly isolated. So what exactly turned this dream vacation into a deadly ghost ship? Let's track how this terrifying situation unfolded. Well, things went south incredibly fast. Just 5 days into the trip, a 70-year-old Dutch passenger developed a sudden fever, a bad headache, and mild diarrhea. Within a couple of days, he was severely struggling to breathe. His condition plummeted so fast that by April 11th, he passed away right there on the ship. And the cause? Completely unknown. The ship sailed on, eventually docking near Africa. On April 24th, the deceased man's grieving wife disembarked with his body to fly back home. But then, on April 26th, right as she was about to board a flight in South Africa to Amsterdam, she suddenly collapsed and died at the airport. Meanwhile, back on the ship, the nightmare was spreading like wildfire. A German woman fell ill on April 28th and died just 4 days later. It actually wasn't until May 2nd that the World Health Organization was officially notified, tests were rushed, and this horrifying culprit was finally named.
The diagnosis from the WHO was chilling. It was Hantavirus, and the most terrifying aspect of this pathogen, the mortality rate. It can reach up to 50%. Let that sink in for a second. Half of the people infected with certain strains of this virus simply don't survive. It's basically a coin toss. And to make matters worse, despite all of modern medicine's incredible advancements, there is absolutely no FDA or WHO-approved vaccine for hantavirus. There isn't even a proven antiviral cure. If you get infected, doctors can really only provide supportive care. Ultimately, it's entirely up to your own immune system to fight off a virus that kills 1 in 2 people it infects.
So to understand why it's so incredibly lethal, we need to look at what this virus actually does to the human body. You see, hantavirus isn't just one single virus. It's an entire family of viruses carried by rodents, and different types of rodents carry different strains. These strains cause 2 distinct, horrific diseases, depending on where you are in the world. Over in Asia and Europe, the virus typically causes hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome, or HFRS. This brutally attacks the kidneys, causing them to fail and triggers severe internal bleeding. But over in the Americas, the strains cause hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, or HPS. And this is exactly what was happening on that cruise ship. It violently attacks the respiratory system, dangerously filling the patient's lungs with fluid until they basically suffocate. Now, you might be thinking this sounds like some brand new exotic superbug, but hantavirus actually has a pretty dark history. It first emerged on the global stage over 70 years ago during the Korean War in the 1950s. Imagine being an American soldier deployed to South Korea, only to be struck down by this mysterious illness that caused severe fever, vomiting, and ultimately kidney failure. Over 3,000 soldiers fell severely ill, and about 15% of them died. At the time, doctors were completely baffled. They literally didn't know if it was a natural disease or some kind of chemical weapon. It took scientists almost 30 years to finally solve the mystery. In the 1980s, a South Korean virologist linked the illness to rodents and named the virus after the nearby Hantan River. And that discovery brilliantly illustrates how deeply tied this virus is to environmental ecosystems. Let's fast forward a bit to a dramatic outbreak in May 1993 in the American Southwest. 10 young, perfectly healthy members of the Navajo tribe suddenly died from fluid filling their lungs. At first, modern scientists just couldn't crack the case. But you know who did? The Navajo tribal elders. They already knew the answer through their oral history. They explained this deadly, literal, ecological domino effect. It starts with an El Niño weather event, which brings unusually heavy rain. This rain causes a massive boom in the growth of pinyon pine nuts.
Well, those nuts are prime food for local mice. The abundance of food leads to a massive rodent population explosion. More mice naturally mean a massive spike in the virus, which inevitably leads to a deadly human outbreak.
And hey, this isn't just an American or European problem either. For a really long time, scientists assumed hantavirus just wasn't present in India. However, a multi-institutional study conducted between 2005 and 2008 in the Vellore district of Tamil Nadu proved that assumption completely wrong. Researchers actually found 28 confirmed cases, primarily among chronic kidney disease patients, warehouse workers, and members of the Irula tribe, whose traditional occupation actually includes catching rats. When they tested the broader general population, they found hantavirus antibodies in about 4% of people. This proved that this silent killer was already there, quietly infecting people who lived or worked in close proximity to rodents without anyone realizing exactly what the heck it was. Now, what's really interesting about this piece of the puzzle is the massive plot twist it brings to our mystery. Up until 1996, the absolute golden rule of hantavirus was that you could only catch it directly from a rodent, like from breathing in dust contaminated with their droppings or urine. It did not spread from person to person. But then, an outbreak in southern Argentina shattered that rule entirely. Scientists identified a specific strain called the Andes virus. To this day, the Andes strain is the only known member of the entire hantavirus family documented to have human-to-human transmission. And yep, you guessed it, this was the exact strain wreaking havoc on our isolated cruise ship.
I know. Hearing the phrase human-to-human transmission probably brings up a ton of fresh trauma from recent global lockdowns. But let's take a collective deep breath here. Don't panic just yet. The way the Andes strain spreads is vastly different from highly contagious airborne viruses like COVID-19 or the flu. It requires close, prolonged physical contact. We're talking about sharing a bed, direct contact with bodily fluids, or caring very closely for a sick patient. Furthermore, it has an incredibly short transmission window. People are generally only contagious for about a single day early on in their illness. So you aren't going to catch it just by walking past someone in the grocery store aisle.
Let's move back to our ghost ship and see how this builds a complete picture. How did the Andes strain even get on the vessel to begin with? Well, the investigation tracked it back to March 2026, right before the cruise departed. Our very first victims, that Dutch couple, had gone on a bird-watching shore excursion in Ushuaia. During this tour, they ended up at a local landfill that was absolutely swarming with rats. It is perhaps the most tragic irony of the whole trip. I mean, imagine flying halfway across the world for a luxury Antarctic cruise, only to catch a deadly virus at a garbage dump. By sheer tragic luck, they boarded the cruise ship almost immediately after this exposure. If they had just waited a few days to board, that incredibly short one-day transmission window would have closed, and the virus likely wouldn't have spread at all. But the timing was a perfect storm, allowing the infection to jump to others in the confined, tight environment of the ship. As you can imagine, the aftermath for the ship itself was incredibly grim. By May 10th, the vessel had 10 confirmed cases and 3 tragic deaths. It became a true pariah of the seas. For days, it just lingered near the coast of West Africa, but the nation of Cape Verde explicitly denied them permission to dock, completely terrified of importing the deadly pathogen. Finally, Spain allowed the ship to dock at the Canary island of Tenerife. A massive medical evacuation operation was launched. Patients were airlifted to ICUs in South Africa, the Netherlands, and Switzerland. Even the healthy crew members, including 2 Indian nationals, were flown to Europe and placed under strict quarantine to ensure the nightmare ended right there. Which brings us to the elephant in the room. Are we looking at the start of the next massive global pandemic? Well, according to the World Health Organization, the risk of global spread is considered very low. Because it is not airborne and that transmission window is so remarkably short, a widespread 14-day quarantine like we saw with COVID simply isn't necessary. It just doesn't spread fast enough or easily enough to cover the globe. However, and this is a massive however, the threat to anyone who actually gets infected is incredibly high due to that brutal 50% mortality rate. It might not sweep the globe, but for the individuals it touches, it is absolutely devastating. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that this is a wake-up call, especially with massive El Niño weather patterns predicted, which, as we know, can trigger those massive rodent population booms. Because there is no vaccine and no cure, our absolute best weapon is prevention. And the power to protect yourself is entirely in your hands. The steps are simple, but vital. Seal any gaps in your home so rodents cannot get in. If you have to go into a dusty, enclosed space, like an old shed or a warehouse, throw on an N95 mask and gloves to avoid breathing in any contaminated dust. Practice excellent hygiene. Don't leave food sitting out, dispose of your garbage securely, and clear away any debris around your home that mice might view as a cozy nesting spot. Because you see, hantavirus is the ultimate silent threat. It really only makes global headlines when several people die suddenly and traumatically, like on an isolated luxury cruise ship. But the reality is, this virus has been quietly infecting people around the world for decades, right under our noses. Armed with this knowledge, you are now equipped to protect yourself from an invisible enemy that requires just a little bit of awareness to defeat. So it leaves us with one final thought as we close out today's explainer. As human footprints expand deeper into nature and global weather patterns become more extreme, are we truly a mystery with me? Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe.